Greetings and salutations, my friend. My lips are burning. I know it's probably not how you imagined this video would start, but I just ate a pretty spicy Korean bibimbap and my lips are on fire. Anyway, I'm back from a little summer break and going straight back to analyzing Brave New World. And we're at chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a pretty long chapter that covers quite a lot of topics and concepts, and it's designed in a way that the scenes there are sort of intertwined and they're intermixed, connected with each other. So you see a piece of a scene over here mixed with a scene somewhere else, and they're mixed like that. Obviously, I'm not going to analyze this chapter in that same way. Instead, I'm first going to focus on one particular aspect of this chapter and then another aspect of this chapter later. One focusing on the effects of conditioning in children, and then focusing on how it affects adults and their lives as presented in this chapter. There's also a bit of a need to get a little political on one specific thing in this episode. Now, the first aspect of conditioning in children present in this chapter that I wish to focus on is consumerism. At the very start of this chapter, we see kids playing with balls.
Say what?
Not that kind of balls, you weirdo. Play balls, you know, like the kinds we use for stuff like football and basketball and baseball. What else is there? Volleyball, pool, bowling. And this particular game they're playing revolves around the ball being thrown onto some revolving disc, and then it goes down some tunnel. There's some apparatus. I think the way this scene is described sort of makes it very difficult for me to visualize that particular game. I don't think it's being described in detail. My mind doesn't really know what I'm supposed to be imagining, or if what I'm imagining is what it's actually supposed to look like. Or maybe that was the point by Aldous Huxley to describe how unnecessarily convoluted those games are, so that our minds, you know, the minds of people who are conditioned to live in a very different reality, will think like, what the hell is going on, right? And the point of this is to teach kids from a very young age to consume, to spend as much money as possible, because apparently it costs a lot to play this game. You know, there's expensive equipment, there's different parts to it, and so on. Strange, mused the director as they turned away. Strange to think that even in our Ford's days, most games were played without more apparatus than a ball or two and a few sticks, and perhaps a bit of netting. Imagine the folly of allowing people to play elaborate games which do nothing whatever to increase consumption. It's madness. Nowadays, the controllers won't approve of any new game unless it can be shown that it requires at least as much apparatus as the most complicated of existing games. So kids are sort of being programmed into thinking that in order for there to be play, to have entertainment or some kind of leisure activity, you have to spend a lot of money. And just pulling back from that a little bit, relating to something that I think a lot of us will be able to relate to, especially older generations. Right, okay, I'm not that old, I'm in my 30s, but considering I grew up in the 90s, it seems like a very different reality from what is going on right now. Because we would find anything out there, right? And I think it goes for boomers, Gen X and millennials, right? Like, we would find a stick, a stone, and it will be something to play with. No need to spend money. We would just go outside and play and do whatever. Nowadays, kids need their iPods and what the hell do kids play with these days? You see, I don't even know, honestly, but it probably costs money, right? And a lot of them find this idea that, oh, you know, we just used to grab sticks and pretend that it was swords. They would look at us like, what the hell? Like, why would you do that, right? It feels like a very different reality, and that this change has happened very rapidly in a very short time, just from one generation to another. I think another example of change that was this rapid was television that happened in the 1950s, and how it sort of separated that generation from the previous generation that didn't grow up with that. Going back to the topic of consumerism and expensive shit, you know, a lot of the time I hear, and someone even commented on the video in which I did the analysis of the first chapter of Brave New World, that Brave New World is the criticism of communism. 1984 is the commentary on or criticism of fascism. And you see, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's much more complicated. I think it's sort of a simplification. In the case of both books, I think 1984 is trying to tell us something more than it being fascism. I think a lot of right-wingers are also relating to 1984, and they see things in that novel that they relate to what the left wing is doing, and the left wing is sort of relating to 1984 and think about what the right wing is doing. I don't think it necessarily comments on one particular side. I think it goes beyond that, and I think it's the same with Brave New World, because what we're seeing in this book is not communism. It has some elements that have been present in Soviet Union for sure. We've already discussed some of them, but consumerism, the idea is with consumerism is primarily a capitalist concept. It's not something you see in hardcore communist countries like Soviet Union, North Korea. China is very different because China actually has free market. China has never actually been a full-on communism. Technically, this part of the book is just a commentary on consumerism that is present in capitalism. That is sort of an inevitable aspect of capitalism. What we're actually seeing so far in the society of this book is ideas presented by Karl Marx and Adam Smith rolled into a really grotesque picture, but it really has those ideas of both sides, right? Like you have the left-wing ideas here and the right-wing ideas as well, and we often live under this idea, well, at least some of us, I know I did, that if you combine the elements of both, you get something good. And to some degree I still agree with that. I think, you know, a lot of the time it works. Even considering the country I'm living in, Norway, it uses ideas of both socialism and capitalism. A lot of the time when some people in America talk about Norway or Denmark or Sweden, they think socialism, especially people on the left in the US. When they speak of Norway, they say, yes, socialism. Here's an example where socialism works. Well, that's not exactly the case. In reality, what we have here is capitalism mixed with social welfare system and economic safety net and so on. But this exists, this is allowed because of the money they make from the capitalist system here. It's very easy to fall into this idea that oh yeah, it's an ideal solution, right? And a lot of the time it works, but at the same time we also might be fooled into believing that this is an idyllic society. And I think what Huxley is actually trying to show in this book, that this too can lead to something dystopian. This too can lead to something grotesque, this marriage of ideas of the left and the right. Like, it can result in something good, but it can also result in something bad, because inherently the terms left and right, they don't really carry the meaning when it comes to authoritarianism, the levels of authoritarianism, because you can have very libertarian left and very libertarian right. And now if you combine the ideas of libertarian left with libertarian right, you will get something more or less good. I think in most all democratic societies that have done that in Europe or Asia, there will always be some element of that authoritarianism, and there will be a risk of it actually growing, right? And that's where that risk stems from. And we're seeing an example in this book, what will happen if that marriage of ideas results in something more authoritarian, or if the marriage of the ideas from the left and the right is actually coming from the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right. Then, well, you're in for a journey, mate. At the end of the day, the goal of consumerism is to stimulate economy. And this also plays to the idea of stability, which is the very first concept we were introduced to at the start of chapter 1. And the kind of, because I think chapter 1 and 2 were focusing a lot on social stability. This part right here focuses on economic stability achieved through consumerism. Now, the next part of the programming and conditioning in children is taking a bit of a dark turn. I think many of us will probably agree on that. I think it's something many of us are sensitive to when it comes to the innocence of child and things I will not say out loud here because YouTube will probably block this video, but you know what I mean. And I think it's completely understandable why we're so sensitive to that, and I think that we absolutely should be. Because what we're seeing in this scene is very young individuals engaging in erotic play and being encouraged to do so by adults. And it's considered normal, a normal aspect of human development. In a little grassy bay, between tall clumps of Mediterranean heather, two children, a little boy of about 7 and a little girl who might have been a year older, were playing very gravely, and with all the focused attention of scientists intent on a labor of discovery, a rudimentary sexual game. Now, I'm not going to say exactly why this is done yet, because in the second part of this video I'm going to talk about the effects of that conditioning in adults, but I think you can have certain ideas to how kids would relate to sexuality and sex when it is being presented here in such a casual way and at such a young age, at an age at which I don't think kids actually completely understand what they're doing. They're doing what they're being told, and they are expected to do so, and it creates an expectation in their mind that they have to do that because that's what's expected of them, right? And subconsciously, obviously, they know what's going on, and it affects their future psychological trajectory. A good question is whether this actually causes some trauma in children. It's not discussed in this chapter, but certain things that are completely natural and they're really a part of life and part of this natural reality, such as sex, violence, and death, when we're exposed to that at a very young age, it might actually mess us up a little bit. For me, death was certainly that example. And we also see here in the scene what happens when a child doesn't wish to engage in that kind of activity. From a neighboring shrubbery emerged a nurse, leading by the hand a small boy, who howled as he went. An anxious-looking little girl trotted on her heels. "What's the matter?" asked the director. The nurse shrugged her shoulders. "Nothing much," she answered. "It's just that this little boy seems rather reluctant to join in the ordinary erotic play. I'd noticed it once or twice before, and now again today. He started yelling just now." "Honestly," put in the anxious-looking little girl, "I didn't mean to hurt him or anything. Honestly." "Of course you didn't, dear," said the nurse reassuringly. "And so," she went on, turning back to the director, "I'm taking him in to see the assistant superintendent of psychology, just to see if anything's at all abnormal." Her last name, Trotsky, is another reference to a real-life person, and as I said in the first episode of this series, this book is full of such references. Trotsky being a reference to Lev Trotsky, or how he's often called in the English language, Leon Trotsky. Trotsky was a Russian key revolutionary figure in the first half of the 20th century. What really intrigues and worries and disturbs me about this scene in particular is that the moment this child does not wish to engage in anything sexual, he's automatically being seen as there is something wrong with him that needs to be fixed, instead of seeing it as something, hey, this kid is not ready for that, let's leave him, let's not traumatize him. But instead he goes to the psychologist, and in this world, the role of that psychologist is not to listen to this kid, to help him. No, it is to set him on a certain path, so he's just like everyone else in the society. They don't really take into consideration that people come in different shapes. Well, but physically, but in this case also mentally, psychologically. We can be very different on the inside, we can have very different needs, and our reaction to specific things, both physical stimuli, events, as well as experiences, social and human experiences in general, can have different effects in different individuals. And because there is no room for individuality and individualism in this book, this obviously gets ignored, which makes me think just how many individuals are actually suffering on the inside until the point when they become so programmed, so brainwashed, that they literally become all the same, like ants, where the individual dies. It's a pretty terrifying image, and it sort of makes you appreciate suffering, right? Because when you're suffering because hey, I don't want any of that, that's the point when you're an individual, right? But when that part of you dies, when you become part of that machine, which is exactly what happens to those individuals, when that suffering ends, you're practically dead, really. You walk, yeah, you function, but you're just part of the machine. You're more of an you're really more of a bot than a human at that point. And it's sort of sad, myself being someone who grew up being different. I know just how much it sucks to grow up being different when there are certain expectations to what you're supposed to be like, right? Especially if you're born neurodivergent, autistic, like me, and you're not attracted to women, as most boys are supposed to be. It's an experience of sorts, definitely. And just imagining, that there's no room for that in this society sort of breaks my heart, even though, it's a fictional world. It's not that unrealistic, it's not that far, because we have been doing something very similar. For most of the Western history, we have been rather insensitive to people's needs, people who just didn't fit that mold. It's just only recently that we have become aware to stuff like autism or different types of sexualities and so on. So in that sense, the society of the Brave New World has become super regressive. And when I say that it's not unrealistic, well, we don't have to look far to find an example of something very similar happening. And we just have to travel to Germany for a moment. And you know what? We're going to explore a bit of a dark territory, so let's stop for a beer and a proper Wurst before we go there. You know, let's enjoy ourselves in Bavaria for a little bit. Let's enjoy the view, yeah? And now that you've enjoyed that for a few seconds, let's dive deep into this shit. Let's go to German preschools. It's something that has happened fairly recently. It was just a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. German preschools have proposed something called body exploration rooms, or sexual exploration rooms. There were rooms inside preschools, or kindergartens if you prefer. We're in Germany after all, so I'd say it's appropriate, where children were encouraged to explore their body and engage in sexual activity with themselves and other kids, where they were basically also taught to masturbate and stuff like that. And you know what? This story actually has a happy ending. That shit was banned. And that is something we should be absolutely grateful for. Now, this proposition, these ideas have received a lot of backlash from the German right wing. Now, I don't always agree with the right wing, whatever country we speak of. And I don't always agree with the left wing either, but I have viewers on this channel who are both left wing and right wing, and I know that there are good people on both sides. And I think that standing against something like that is something all good people should do, and I think it is something that, after all, should unite us. I think we should all stand against harm being done to children, no matter where we stand economically or when it comes to some social values, whether we're liberals or conservatives. I just think that's just common decency, right? But most of that backlash came from the right wing, and it sort of saddens me, really, because there's a lot of people on the left who would be absolutely on board of that. The problem is the media, right? And I have criticized the right-wing media a lot, and the left-wing media, but in this particular case I want to talk about the left-wing media, because the left-wing media a lot of the time chooses to not talk about certain things, which is a very worrisome development that it just ignores. It ignores the harm being done, especially to young people, right? And then the right wing takes interest in that, and the left thinks, oh, okay, this must be just propaganda because it's just the right wing. And it's just another tool to divide people on something that I think should be a very uniting issue, if you ask me. Now, in the second part of this video, let's focus on how this programming and conditioning affects people in their adult lives. Towards the end of this chapter, we see people repeating this phrase, "ending is better than mending," suggesting that this society has been programmed to throw stuff away rather than fix it yourself. And again, this is all about the stability in the economy, because if you throw stuff away, you buy new stuff, you're stimulating the economy, right? But if you can fix it yourself, you will spend less money, and new products are not going to be bought at the same rate, right? So it's all about how much people buy, how much people spend. Money is for spending. Don't think of money as something you need to save for some purpose. No, just spend it. Spend it all, here and right now, right? Because, why? Well, you have it. And we want it. We want your money, so buy our products. Did our product stop working? Well, hell, buy another one. I think this is something that hits home quite close, especially for us millennials, Gen Z generations, because we, on average, are less likely to fix objects, household appliances, compared to our parents. Either call someone to fix it, or we throw it away, we buy new stuff. I'm not gonna be a hypocrite here and claim that I don't do that, because there's a lot of things that I don't know how to fix. And looking back at the previous generations in my family, they would fix literally anything. However, there's quite a lot of things I am capable of fixing, such as guitar and my guitar amps. I'm fixing it myself. Actually, the guitar I'm having, the one guitar I play, Gibson, this one I have had since 2010. So I had it for 15 years. And during that time, it has had several different issues, you know, things that needed to be changed, parts that broke, and so on. And it's really not that hard to fix a guitar, because I think it's a very, very useful skill to have, to being able to renew things you already possess and continue using them, rather than, oh, okay, just throw it away. And if you think about it, it's sort of weird that our generations does it less than our parents and grandparents did, because with their access to the internet, it's really easy to Google how to fix things. You know, you just type it in and it gives you a proper instructions. You can even get video instructions, something that previous generations didn't have back in the day, things that they had to figure out themselves. Today, they are literally holding our hands, and we still throw out so much stuff that could be renewed. Of course, this concept of consumerism is also shown in this chapter in other, more subtle ways, such as in the conversation between Lenina and Fanny. That is a big part of this chapter, at least thematically. Lenina is, of course, a reference to... I don't really think I have to explain that. In this chapter, we get a proper description of the clothing items that Lenina is wearing, but Huxley chooses not to describe her appearance as much when it comes to everything else. She is what she wears, and I think it's a very important thing to notice that he chooses to focus on those things she's wearing, that she is what she owns. And of course, Fanny also takes interest in her clothes, and she also wants to buy that, she wants to have it. It's all about having, owning as much as possible. Speaking of having, let's move on to the topic of promiscuity, which is a result of the conditioning that people in this society have been experiencing since pretty much early childhood. And why did I say having specifically? It's because in this society of Brave New World, people are having each other all the time, having sex with each other. Promiscuity is largely being encouraged for people to participate in. It's being looked down upon you if you choose to stay with one partner for a longer period of time, or if you're sleeping with just one person for a longer period of time. Society starts to look at you like, there's something wrong with you, mate. That's something seriously wrong with you. I suppose you're going out? Lenina nodded. Who with? Henry Foster. Again? Fanny's kind, rather moon-like face took on an incongruous expression of pain and disapproving astonishment. Do you mean to tell me you're still going out with Henry Foster? Later on, the conversation continues. But after all, Lenina was protesting, it's only about 4 months now since I've been having Henry. Only 4 months. I like that. And what's more, Fanny went on, pointing an accusing finger, there's been nobody else except Henry all that time, has there? Lenina blushed scarlet, but her eyes, the tone of her voice, remained defiant. No, there hasn't been anyone else, she answered, almost truculently. And I jolly well don't see why there should have been. Oh, she jolly well doesn't see why there should have been, Fanny repeated, as though to an invisible listener behind Lenina's left shoulder. Then, with a sudden change of tone, but seriously, she said, I really do think you ought to be careful. It's such horribly bad form to go on, and like this with one man. At 40 or 35, it wouldn't be so bad, but at your age, Lenina? No, it really won't do. And you know how strongly the DHC objects to anything intense or long drawn. 4 months of Henry Foster without having another man. Why, he'd be furious if he knew. Now, this scene is a perfect example of this kind of societal pressure to not be in a committed relationship with people, to participate in today we call it hookup culture, you can call it promiscuity, whatever you want to call it. But what's really interesting here is that it's not just the kind of social pressure that comes from a created social norm by your peers. We also see an element of authority here, where the director of hatchery and conditioning, we see that his reach goes beyond simply the conditioning and programming of the young. We also see that he's sort of monitoring people, his workers, right? Like, y'all should be acting normal. Y'all should be sleeping around. If you don't, the fuck are you doing? You know, stop fucking around and, well, start fucking around. So that pressure is again coming not just from the peers, but also from the higher ups. And I think a lot of us like to think in terms that we separate our personal lives, our sex lives, from our professional lives. Here, well, it's not exactly the case. Your professional life sort of pressures you into participating in sex life with as many people as possible. Later on, the conversation continues. Lenina shook her head. Somehow, she mused, I hadn't been feeling very keen on promiscuity lately. There are times when one doesn't. Haven't you found that too, Fanny? Fanny nodded her sympathy and understanding. But one's got to make the effort, she said sententiously. One's got to play the game. After all, everyone belongs to everyone else. Yes, everyone belongs to everyone else, Lenina repeated slowly and sighing, was silent for a moment, then taking Fanny's hand, gave it a little squeeze. You're quite right, Fanny. As usual. I'll make the effort. Again, here we see even more of that pressure, but what's the most interesting here is the particular phrase, everyone belongs to everyone else. This phrase is also being told in this chapter by Mustafa Mon, who's one of the world controllers. And I find it interesting that his name is Mon, because it comes from the Latin mundus, which means world. So, kind of a fitting name for someone who's controlling the whole world, basically. The phrase itself, everyone belongs to everyone, perfectly captures the essence and attitude towards sex that this society of Brave New World has. But I also have to disagree with this statement wholeheartedly. Just recently this summer, I've made a video about relationship anarchy, as a relationship anarchist myself. And in that video I said something, perhaps not word-to-word quotation. Nobody belongs to anyone, right? Like, we are free beings, and I think the way we form relationships should reflect that. This phrase seems to be the very opposite of that, right? Because I think there are three ways of looking at relationship. The standard monogamous approach that we do in a Western society, where you belong to one person, or there's my approach, nobody belongs to anyone, right? We approach and go into relationship out of free will. There is no ownership there, and then there's everyone belongs to everyone. And this one, I would argue, is actually more has more in common with your standard monogamy, even though it's not monogamous at all, but it's actually even more similar in the way that there is a certain pressure and expectation to be owned by someone. Like, you're not going into romantic or sexual relationships in the society of Brave New World out of your own free will. You're sort of doing it out of the obligation. And a lot of the time, I think that the citizens of Brave New World, they're sort of not really aware of that, because it's so deeply ingrained into their culture and mentality that, hey, this is what they're supposed to be doing, right? And this is sort of the same with how monogamy operates in our society. Those are actually, if you think about it, very, very similar concepts. Because, I don't really think it matters whether the norms are monogamous or if they're poly, if the norms are progressive, if the norms are conservative. As long as there is a norm of what you should be like, there will always be this expectation that you should fit that mold. And it seems that no matter what that norm becomes, I think people in general have very little tolerance for those who think differently. And a lot of the time we like to think of liberal people as more open-minded, more tolerant, but they're actually kind of intolerant of people who think in different kinds of norms than themselves, in a way. I don't really necessarily think they're more open-minded, and I have had so many interactions with both liberals and conservatives. I think they're both very close-minded, just in different ways, you could say. And when this close-mindedness manifests itself on a governmental level, you can imagine what kind of a form it takes. And when that government itself is very authoritarian, or almost totalitarian, and sometimes in very invisible ways too, because on the surface, Brave New World seems like a pretty liberal place, pretty good place, until you start looking at it and you realize just how dark and messed up it is, that the free will that people have here is just an illusion, that there really is no free will in this society, because when you look close enough, you'll see there are strings attached, and we are just puppets controlled by a puppeteer. Moving on, eventually Lenina starts to agreeing with Fanny. She gives in to this social pressure, and she says, I will try with this guy Bernard Marx. And this is actually the first mention of Bernard Marx. Again, another reference to a pretty big name here. And Marx is a very central character in this book. And here we get to learn that Marx is a alpha plus, which gives him a pretty high place in this societal hierarchy. However, Fanny doesn't necessarily react to this news very positively, She says, "He's so ugly," said Fanny, "but I rather like his looks. And then so small." Fanny made a grimace. Smallness was so horribly and typically low caste. "I think that's rather sweet," said Lenina. "One feels one would like to pet him, like a cat. Fanny was shocked. They say somebody made a mistake when he was still in the bottle. Thought he was a gamma and put alcohol into his blood surrogate. That's why he's so stunted. What nonsense! Lenina was indignant. Marx being one of the main characters in the story, so far what we know about him is that someone who people talk about rather negatively behind his back. In another scene in this chapter, Bernard Marx actually plays a pretty central role. He overhears some of his co-workers talking about women, how they were fucking them and shit like that, and he reacts to it in a way that, to me, ever since I read this book for the first time when I was 15, hit home really close, because I also found myself having very similar thoughts to Marx. Not that Marx, but you know what I mean. They're just speaking of these women like they're a piece of meat, you know. It's so reductivist to view women in such way. And it also goes the other way, you know, because in this society, and our society as well, let's be honest, women also view men in a similar way, you know. It's an interaction relationship based on pure transaction, and like, okay, you're giving me something you have, I'm giving you something I have, and let's just use each other for our bodies. I'm not a big fan of that, because it's so shallow, you know. You're not seeing that human as another person. That's just an animal you're going to use to fulfill your basic needs. It's just feels wrong on a deeper level to me, and I've always related to the character of Bernard Marx, and he also seems like someone who feels isolated from the society he's living in and his workplace, you know, like he interacts with his workers, he's friendly with them, but deep down he really doesn't like them. And I have always been someone who felt very similar about the environment in which I grew up, you know, and I kind of know the feeling of that isolation, because you think in ways that are different from what is considered normal around you, which makes Bernard a super relevant character for probably many readers, not just myself. If you've listened so far into this video, please let me know, what are your personal opinions on this character of Bernard Marx? Do you like him? Do you find him relatable? In the next episodes of this series, I'm going to go a little deeper into the character and the story arc of Marx. However, let's leave Marx for now and focus on a topic that is mentioned in this chapter very briefly, but is actually going to be very central to this book later on. Namely, Soma. It's a fictional drug, a recreational drug that works a little bit like alcohol, a little bit like opium, you know. It's the opium to the masses. It's not without a reason that Huxley chose to name one of his character Marx, you know, when Marx literally described religion as the opium of the masses. And you know, something will always take that role, no matter what it is in society, you know. It doesn't matter whether it's drugs or religion or whatever, something will always play that role. Another interesting thing about the Soma is that it makes your worries go away, you know. It's like this kind of blissful revelation. And on a couple occasions on this channel, I have talked about transhumanism. As a transhumanist myself, and I take particular interest in David Pearce's concept of super happiness or eternal bliss. Something that I don't necessarily like as a transhumanist. I don't necessarily think this should be the direction for humanity to take, to live in this constant state of bliss. I actually think it's more dystopian than it is utopian, and well, we don't really have to look that far, just how utopian it can be. And as someone who also has my own personal history with drugs, with antipsychotics and painkillers, I know how good of a distraction drugs can be from the actual problems that are going on. And when I'm reading this book, and I also have a different perspective on that after having that my experience with drugs that I haven't had as a teenager that I was reading this book almost 20 years ago. Now, when I'm reading it, I see a society that sort of ignores its issues by just drugging themselves the hell out of it, you know. And we see another scene with Bernard Marx and his co-worker, Henry Foster, who's pushing Soma on Marx. Another perfect example of peer pressure that's taking place here. First he tells him, what you need is a gram of Soma. Later he adds, take a holiday from reality whenever you like and come back without so much as a headache or a mythology. Take it, insisted Henry Foster. Take it. Take it! Take it! 1 cubic centimeter cures 10 gloomy sentiments, said the assistant predestinator, citing a piece of homely hypnopedic wisdom. And do remember that a gram is better than a damn. Now, what I think is most interesting about this scene is not the drug itself, or this interaction in and of itself, is the fact that they are literally repeating the slogans that they've learned through sleep learning, which we talked about in the last episode. It's interesting that this scene in this chapter also appears very shortly after another scene in which Bernard Marx is also introduced as this character who literally works on the hypnopedia, sleep learning, right? And he's sort of aware of that, like, he says something like, it takes so and so many repetitions for something to become true. I think this is one of the most interesting points in this whole book that we can easily transfer from the world of this book into ours. Like, how many times do you have to repeat something, either out loud or in your thoughts, for it to become true? Is truth just that? Things we convinced ourselves to believe in? A lot of the time it is, and those can be things that relate to the physical reality, such as the existence of God, the belief that Earth is flat or that Earth is round, the belief that the universe is infinite, the belief that the universe started with the Big Bang. Are those things true simply because we've heard them repeated so many times that we just accept all that as true at that given point in time when this is the knowledge available to us? What about statements of morality? What is right and what is wrong? Are those simply things we repeated ourselves to the point we're convincing ourselves it's true that something is good? Is it true that something is bad? And if you think about it, right, look how many slogans surround us. Whenever there's a political campaign, you know, like, some candidate will always have a slogan of sorts, whatever it is, you know. It's just that catches attention, you know. And most people will not remember the detailed program that their political party have or this candidate have, but they will remember the slogan, right? Like, they will associate that person with that slogan. What about most movements, most activists? What they're using is slogans that they're repeating. If you've ever seen activists marching, what they actually do is that they repeat the same phrases over and over again. the more times you repeat it, the more convincing that phrase becomes. And I think at this point, it's not just cultural. This is not just a cultural aspect that we love phrases and slogans. I think it's just engraved in our nature that we are naturally preconditioned to be attracted to simple, repeatable phrases that we just accept as truth. And that's why they're so powerful. Even though from a purely logical point of view, they shouldn't be, you know? And I don't know if it's my autistic brain that just doesn't go well with slogans. That's why I've never liked simple phrases. I never liked memes, things like that, because I'm always been attracted to like properly constructed arguments, and there's a lack of that in those phrases, right? But they have to admit that they have huge impact, you know, on human nature, because it is human nature. Like, this is biology at play. We love to separate biology from the culture and the society, and I disagree with it completely, because everything we do in a society, everything we do in a culture is a reflection of our biology, of our nature. Shit, Huxley knew that, right? Huxley knew that very well. That's why he constructed this whole reality of this book around a society that just repeats slogans, right? And they are true. In some sense, they are true because they are true to the people who say them. But we also know it's all engineered, right? So it can't actually be true. So it is true at the same time to someone, but it also isn't. It's an engineered truth. Schrodinger's truth. It's true and not true at the same time. Alright, that will be it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any thoughts you would like to share about this chapter or about this book, please share it in the comments. I would love to read them. I hope you have a good day, take good care of yourself, and I see you soon. Ciao.